Hello viewers and welcome back to SaharaTV. Following the demise of former South African President and human rights icon Nelson Mandela, a number of stories, unknown stories, have been emerging. One of these stories suggests that the international icon was snubbed by Ghana's president at the time, Kwame Nkrumah, when Mr. Mandela visited the country to confer with him and to seek his support for the struggle against apartheid. Now, this story has been denied by Nkrumah's daughter, but on the line from Ghana is a man who will also shed some light on this matter. With me today is Ambassador K.B Asante, a retired Ghanaian diplomat, writer, and statesman. He was Principal Secretary of the African Affairs Secretariat from 1960 to 1966. Ambassador Asante, thank you for being with us here on SaharaTV.
Pleasure.
So, sir, please clarify for us. It seems to be some conflicting sides here on when Nelson Mandela visited in 1962 in Ghana. Did Kwame Nkrumah really snub Mandela, as some reports are saying it, or and if he did, why? Or could you clarify the situation a bit for us, sir?
Now, he did not snub Mandela. As you are aware, visitors, people do not see presidents anyhow.
Right.
The visitor is processed by officials and aides and so on. Now, Mandela visited Ghana, and normally Nkrumah would have seen him because he was a freedom fighter. Now, the situation was this. At that time, the organization or the institution in Ghana dealing with freedom fighters and non-independent African countries was the Bureau of African Affairs, which was at that time, which was established by the great African writer George Padmore.
Okay.
When he died, his secretary, K.B Asante, took over. Now, naturally, Asante was sort of the same caliber as George Padmore. And when Mandela visited Ghana, therefore there was this, what I call mistake, a break in Ghana's intelligence and competence of administration. The Bureau of African Affairs should have processed the visit, and Nkrumah, I'm sure, would have seen Mandela. But the facts were as follows. That before then, Nkrumah supported, as I said, freedom fighters,
right,
and helped non-independent African countries to be independent. Through the Bureau of African Affairs, with the help of the African Affairs Secretariat. Now, but Nkrumah believed in the armed struggle. And at one time, there were two big organizations in South Africa, the ANC, African National Congress, and the other one, the ACP, yes. And the African National Congress was not then in the forefront of the fight. They were against apartheid, all right, but they were not very much involved in the armed struggle.
Okay, so
yes.
Oh, as the
National Congress. Therefore,
right, okay.
Yes, Ghana was, the Bureau of African Affairs was not very happy with the ANC. But things changed, and the Bureau did not realize that there had been that change, and Mandela had become a formidable freedom fighter. So when he visited Accra, they were reluctant to facilitate the introduction of Mandela to Nkrumah. That was what happened. And it was a breakdown in communication, in intelligence, and the competence of the African Affairs, of the Bureau of African Affairs.
Right.
It was as simple as that.
Okay. Now, you mentioned the preference at the time of Ghana, the Bureau of African Affairs, and perhaps Nkrumah himself in the Pan-Africanist Congress versus the ANC. Can you explain some of the policies that the PAC was doing at the time that the Bureau of African Affairs and Ghana in general gave preference to this group that you say was more the forefront of the independence struggle at that time?
At that time, both organizations were fighting against apartheid, but the Pan-African Congress, PAC, was more active.
Oh, okay.
Yes. And it was felt that the ANC was not as vigorous as this other one, and in fact was not the group to help to overthrow the apartheid regime. It was as simple as that. But even at that time, it was clear the ANC was a larger body, and that it was not a uniform party where they were all against the armed struggle.
Right.
When things changed, the ANC changed and eventually became the foremost organization which waged the armed struggle for the independence of South Africa.
Oh, okay. Now, Ambassador, speaking to that, and as you say that ANC became the forefront, looking back at this point, at that time, do you think indigenous South Africans got a good deal from Nelson Mandela's negotiations, which ultimately resulted in the end of apartheid?
That's a very difficult question. In my view, without Mandela, perhaps the South Africa would not have been the one nation we know of it today. It is quite clear that another path would have produced a free South Africa, but after a bloody conflict and over a long period. I, at that time, never expected to see a free South Africa in my lifetime. Now, the Europeans, the Americans, those, if you remember, those were the days of fight between communism and capitalism and so on, free enterprise and so on.
Yeah.
And Europe, generally, Western Europe and America were for promoting what they call democracy and so on. Now, at the same time, it was difficult for them. They were supporting apartheid South Africa. Now, how to change that was very difficult. Now, it dawned on some of them that one could talk to Mandela. Mandela was a person who could bring about the change which took place, as he did. And, there's a long story, some published, others not. A long story, they talked to Mandela in prison and so assessed him, and came to the conclusion that he was the one to work with. And they did. And Mandela, because of his character, did not, was not very bitter as a person that we would do. When you were in prison for 27 years, I would have done what Mandela did. But he was very gracious, he was forgiving and so on. And he was not vengeful. He thought, I myself believe, he realized that the only way was to get the whites, or cooperate with the whites to build the Rainbow Nation, which was established. And the Europeans, Americans, and so on kept their fingers crossed. They supported him, and he did not disappoint them. So what happened was that the structures of apartheid South Africa were maintained. And now South Africa is free in a way that you have a government, a black majority rule, but the institutions stay the same. the Africans are the bottom of the ladder. Quite a number of Africans have joined the upper middle class. They are doing very well, and so on. But on the whole, the economic structures remain the same, and the Africans have not sort of captured the commanding heights of the economy as some of us wanted. So, yes, Mandela did a wonderful thing, but he left a lot undone, and it is for the present government to see to it that real freedom, economic progress was achieved for the African majority.
Thank you for that, sir. Just one final question here. Now, right today, numerous African countries appear to be plagued with somewhat bad leadership, and a factor that impedes the continent's overall development. I was wondering, in your eyes and your thoughts on, is there a ready solution for opening the doors to more inspirational leaders like Dr. Kwame Nkrumah and Nelson Mandela and others?
Well, that's a thing we need, but somehow, in my view, most of Africa seem to have lost self-confidence, which Nkrumah preached at Ghana's independence. And that self-confidence, which enabled Mandela to work with the oppressors and achieve the majority rule, achieve majority rule for South Africa. Now, right now, Africa, Ghana, for example, seem to be doing well, so, but the not as well as many of us hope. And the economy, doesn't seem to be in the hands of Ghanaians. There is still a dependency syndrome. For example, we prepare our budget in Ghana and we leave it to the so-called development partners to balance it for us. And with a little they contribute, they are able to dictate a lot to Ghanaians, and there is the general belief that you cannot move forward, but with the help of the Washington establishment and your European partners. This is a problem not only in Ghana but in many African countries. We lack that self-confidence, that belief that we can do it, and that we should ignore what has happened in Europe and America, but we should learn from it. The Chinese, as he said, one of their leaders said, there was a time when we walked to work. Then later we give bicycles to the people. Then later cars and so on. Now, we have so many cars on the roads of Accra and Kumasi now, but unnecessary poverty plague the majority of Ghanaians. And it is not necessary. It can be tackled, but it can be tackled by a strong, dedicated leadership with a vision, with a belief that we deserve better in Africa and that we can do it.
Okay, sir. Thank you very much for that, and thank you very much for your time on our show today.
Pleasure.
Viewers, that was Ambassador K.B Asante, Ghanaian diplomat, writer, and statesman. He was the principal secretary of the African Affairs Secretariat from 1960 to 66 during the Nkrumah government. Thank you, viewers, for tuning in for this particular segment, and stay tuned. We have more to come, including our Skype segment coming up very soon, as well as all our regular shows coming up later in the day. So stay tuned for a lot more to come.